On behalf of the Lantos Foundation and the Lantos family, it is truly my privilege to welcome you to the 3rd annual Lantos Prize event and to thank you for being here today. We are truly honored today to have the opportunity to recognize someone who in the course of his life, as happens to some people, has had the opportunity to make decisions and choices that frankly illuminate a path for all of us. Paul Rusesabagina, who we honor today, in the face of truly devastating personal threats, chose to ignore those concerns and do what he felt was best to help those around him. It is appropriate probably in this context to repeat the oft-cited rabbi story of my father. My father loved this story about a rabbi who early one morning before the sun was up asked his acolytes how we know that the night has turned to day. One said, when the stars fade. Another said, maybe when we are walking on the trail and we see an animal and we can differentiate between it being a wolf or a dog. Another said, as we look out to the village, perhaps it's when we can tell our house's roof apart from the other roofs. The rabbi looked, he smiled, shook his head and said, you know, we can tell the night has turned to day when we see someone in need on the road and we recognize that person to be our brother. I think I'd add today that Paul Rusesabagina recognized the friends, neighbors, and orphans who were brought to him during the unspeakable massacre that occurred in Rwanda, not only as his brothers and sisters, but as himself. And I think that that is the great motivator that enabled him to transcend fears for himself, fears of death and horrible repercussions, to do what was right. And in doing that, he provided an example. Not only did he save over 1,000 people, but he provided an illuminating example for us for the rest of history. We're deeply grateful and very honored to be able to recognize him today. We thank you all for being here, and we hope you will be able to enjoy the events, and we will proceed now with the rest of our program. Thank you.
I'm Congressman Jack Kingston. I had the honor of serving in Congress with Congressman Lantos, and it is a great honor, also with Congressman Sweat, and it's a great honor to be here with the Lantos Sweat family on such a great occasion. I met Paul Rusesabagina, still having trouble with my southern accent and his southern accent. I can tell you, it's bigger than life. How many of you have seen the movie, which we just saw the clips on? I can tell you, if those of you who have not seen it, you need to go out and rent it immediately. It is one of the best movies you've ever seen. It's truly inspirational, and it is because it's a true story. And if you read his biography, it's also just leaps off the pages. You can't put it down. There is an Episcopalian hymn, which is probably in other religions too, but one that I've sung many times as an Episcopalian, called Every Man and Nation. And the line that just strikes me is, once to every man and nation comes the moment to decide in the strife between good or truth through falsehood for the good or evil side. Our honoree today faced that decision and faced that moment and chose at great personal peril to do the right thing and choose good over evil. And while in Congress we meet lots and lots of great people, in fact, that's probably the greatest benefit of the job, is the people you meet. It's still unbelievable when you meet somebody of this caliber. He's probably one of the greatest men I've ever met, and truly one of the greatest people of our century. And So I'm glad to be here, and now I will turn the microphone over to my colleague, Congressman Royce.
Thank you. There's two families represented up here on this stage for whom genocide, for whom human rights is not a theoretical argument. One of those is Tom Lantos' family, and the other is Paul Rusesabagina's family. Tom Lantos, you know, we talk about how tough he was in standing up for human rights, how steadfast. But I'll tell you tough. Tough is at the age of 15, 16, 17, surviving in a concentration camp in Nazi-occupied Hungary. That is tough. And for Tom Lantos, the reason these were not arguments in theory, the reason he was so impassioned, so steadfast, the reason he would put these objectives of human rights above politics was because he knew the consequences of not doing so and not speaking out, and that is why he was such an ally of the human rights community. That's why we honor him tonight, honor his family. For Paul Rusesabagina, who saved 1,000 lives in Rwanda, and for those of us that have been to Rwanda and seen the consequences, the amputations of those who survived, the grief of those who've been through that, we recognize the toll taken on him and taken on his family. But for Paul, the end of the genocide in Rwanda was not the end of his travails. And I remember in Darfur, Sudan, the arguments that Paul made to me, to Don Cheadle, about going into Darfur and trying to raise the level of awareness. Because at that time here in the United States, we were willing to give some ground on the argument, well, maybe in Darfur, this wasn't genocide, maybe, you know, this was ethnic cleansing, it was whatever we wanted to call it, but we didn't want to call it genocide. And to Paul Rusesabagina, that's exactly what it was, and unless we took that position and got legislation through the House and legislation through the United Nations, it would continue, and the only way to stop it was to arrest the attention of the media, which seems hard to do, given all the day-to-day stories they like to cover on celebrities and personalities. So the idea was, well, why not get a celebrity to come along on the trip? And so Don Cheadle, who was one of the instigators, and Paul and myself, it was my Codell, we invited a Nightline camera crew to come with us and document what they saw. We went into a village that had been attacked by the Janjaweed previously. And we interviewed survivors, and I remember, Paul, one young man who held up his bandaged arm. His hand was missing. And we asked him what happened to his hand, and he said the Janjaweed cut it off. The documentation that was done by the survivors, by their stories about this genocide that was occurring, was aired, and later Paul and others were successful in raising this issue. But I think for us, one of the oddities of the whole aftermath of this is that while Paul's efforts helped build such pressure with respect to Darfur, and I know the situation is terrible in Darfur. What I'm telling you is that without Paul's efforts, that situation today would be far, far worse. The genocide there would be far, far worse. And the thing about Paul is he's understated. He's a very humble man. He's very committed. He's very insightful. But at the same time, he has come under attack by the Rwandan government. And given that government's long-running intolerance of anyone who disagrees with it or tries to point out the obvious or challenges it, frankly, I consider that one more badge of honor which Paul wears. That is one more badge of honor which you wear, Paul. And I'm just here today as a friend to congratulate him and to congratulate his wife and to urge him to keep up that important work and to thank all of you that are in the audience today here to acknowledge the sacrifices and the raw courage that he has shown, not once, but ever since in his effort on behalf of human rights. Thank you all very much.